administrative slides to go through. All of our listeners will be muted. If you have a question, go and hit the raise hand. We'll unmute you. Once you've asked your question, make sure to lower your hand. Additionally, you may enter a question or comment in the chat box. Make sure to select all participants to send to everyone. A PDF of the slides and a recording of the webinar will be made available, and we'll send it. This morning, we'll be speaking with Sue Mohrman, Sue Winby, and Chris Worley. I'll be handing the slides over to Chris now.
As we speak, yeah, as we speak. Welcome, welcome everybody. It's good to see some names and friends and familiar faces in the speaker box and looking at all the participants. I think the subject we're going to talk about today is one. I suspect one of the reasons you're here is that you're sort of wrestling around with this subject in the same way that we are. And the whole notion being, you know, what's happening, we used to talk about the technology trend, right? Every organization was sort of being affected by technology. And now it's become sort of more than just a trend. It's become this kind of tsunami that's sort of, you know, running over us, and the notion that the pace of technological change has just really ramped up, and we began to talk about it amongst ourselves as looking at volatility. There's obviously volatility in the stock market. There's volatility with respect to the technological disruptions that are going on. And then obviously there's some disruptions happening in the way that we organize and put organizations together to try and create value-added work. As we walk through those segments of volatility, I hope that some of these bullets sort of show up as affirming. My guess is some of these bullets will show up as obvious. I hope that in sort of unpacking some of these bullet points, we can begin to talk about the implications of them. So it's one thing to sort of acknowledge that, that technology is coming at us. It's another thing to sort of begin to make sense about what it means and what it's going to do to us in organizations. So we want to sort of look at this notion about volatility and its components. A lot of technologies, digital platforms disrupting the way that we work and live, and beginning to try and understand and get our hands around that. The technological changes themselves are pretty fantastic, and then we have to start talking about the extent to which those technological changes show up in the way the organizations are designed, so that they actually take advantage of the technologies on the one hand, and on the other hand, sort of get embedded in the way we organize so that they don't overwhelm us. So trying to figure out this relationship between technology and the organization is something that I suspect most of you know we've been worried about for some time. We're obviously trying to look at and figure out the notion of what's going to happen to hierarchy and bureaucracy. Gary Hamel had an article in the Harvard Business Review, I think a few months ago, and they interviewed they surveyed 7,000 or 6,000 Harvard Business Review readers, and their conclusion, based on their bureaucracy mass index at a BMI thing that they calculated, they found that, you know, over 60% of the organizations that they followed or tracked in this survey had bureaucracy ratings above 60%, or had scores above 60, and the notion that bureaucracy and hierarchy is very much with us, and how are we going to reconcile those two things inside of this digital trend? So figuring out what the future of hierarchy is and how it's going to shift is obviously a big deal to us. And then we're going to have to figure out what that means for workers, employees, contractors, and the people that sort of staff all this stuff, and sort of looking at the interplay and the relationships and the interdependencies of all these parts. I think another piece that really struck us was the notion of the shifting way we're going to have to talk about leadership. And the phrase we sort of came up with was, we're going to have to talk about how leaders lead the transition into the future, as well as talking about what leaders are going to have to do in leading the organizations of the future. So we've got the leadership process and leading the change, as well as what's it going to look like, what's leadership going to look like once these new organizations get put in place. To address that, the Center for Effective Organizations collaborated, and so we worked with two of our good friends at the Center for Creative Leadership and Spring Networks. And together, these three organizations began to understand and try and come up with an understanding of what are these trends and what are the impacts going to be. And so we decided to pull together a really multidisciplinary, multi-industry, multi-sector group of executives, professionals, experts from different, points of view: business leaders, org designers, strategists, technology experts, ethicists, futurists, transformation, change leaders inside of organizations, and human resource professionals. We pulled together about 30 of these folks for 2 days in the Silicon Valley, and Stu hosted us, and the Spring Networks hosted us in the Silicon Valley for 2 days in September to sort of talk about these objectives. So what are the parameters of organization designs in the future under this really strong technological trends? So how will organizations be designed as they incorporate these new technologies? What design processes and capabilities are going to be required to handle continuous, discontinuous change? How can we account for the co-evolution of capabilities in the social systems? I think this is something you're going to hear Sue and Stu and I talk about throughout the hour. There's a socio-technical system here, and right now it appears that technology is pushing that. We have to start thinking about the extent to which the social system is going to be brought along with it. And that's obviously an area of interest in organization design. And then we started talking about prototypes. Given what we know or think we know about organizations and structures and designs, and given what we think we know about these digital technologies, the emergence of platforms, how might these things sort of get put together? And can we begin to talk about what these networks and platforms and socio-technical systems might look like together? And so that's kind of the path that we're on. I think this represents a formalization of something that we've been talking about for 3 or 4 years now. It's an ongoing process. It's obviously sort of at the beginning stages of a more formal process. And obviously, in talking to this community of org designers, we're also interested in understanding what you guys are doing and how you're sort of dealing with this, and want to involve you as much as we can in the conversation about what's involved here, what the implications are, what you're doing, how you're doing it, what processes seem to be meeting with success, and obviously what processes are not working so well, so that we can begin this conversation and share our knowledge and understanding with this, the design community that we built here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue to start digging into some of these pieces and let her talk a little bit about the implications of some of these things. And Sue, I have to turn this over to you.
Apparently.
So I have to find you first.
I know, I'm right at the top on mine, but I bet I'm not.
I found you.
Okay.
I found you. I'm going to make you presenter. Tell me that I shifted it to you.
I am. I'm the presenter now.
Cool.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Hi to everybody, and thanks for being with us. There's really, from this 2-day conference that we had, which was a wonderful sort of sharing of perspectives that came in from all different angles, including we had ethicists there, and we had people who are designing platforms and so forth. There were three big highlights, and Chris has really hit these, but I want to repeat them with a little different, slightly nuance. That digitization is going to be an accelerating force. And I think that it not only is it changing the way work is done, but it's also influencing the way life is led. And one of the things that we have really made sure that we've attended to and will as this consortium and community and network grows and we have more and more ways that we interact with people, is we are keeping the values piece very much front and center. That society should not necessarily assume that because you can do something technically, it should be done. And certainly society needs to have some sort of input into how it's done and how it influences the way life is led. And so that's one thing that we, almost everybody who was at this session agreed that this is something that has been lacking and at least weak, and the voices of concern about that issue are really now starting to become fairly vocal and important. The second thing that really want to stress is that we had futurists there as well, and it became pretty clear to us that the changes that will be in place in 10 years are horrendous, but that there is right now the need to start changing your organization and its capabilities based on a view of the future. There cannot be a precise view of the future, but there certainly can be a view of the future that has very, very fundamental change in organizations, in our economy and how it operates, in people and the skills and lives that they need to lead and careers that they need to lead, and that whatever we do to redesign cannot be really driven by today's problems. It has to be driven by a discontinuous vision of the future. And that, as Chris said, both the technical and the social dimensions have to be considered. And then the third piece is there's a lot of talk about what the digital leader is going to look like. And certainly the competencies are going to depend to a great extent on how organizations are designed and configured. But that brings with it the probability that there will be new leadership configurations. We, as Chris said, we're really all sort of in the boat of trying to change a hierarchical system that sort of has people going through levels in the organization and across or within functions or within businesses. And, you know, we think that's almost an archetype in our mind when we think of organizations, so much so that when you look at some of the new organizations that we always hear about in Silicon Valley or elsewhere that are leading in the digital transformation, and you look at their actual organization, they've got all the same trappings of bureaucracy with the levels and the roles and I'm in charge of this and you're in charge of that, and you know, the typical sort of what you call bureaucratic load. And what we think is nobody's really seriously pictured what the organization is going to look like in the future. They've pictured what the technology will be able to do and how customers will be able to do it. And I think people like Tom Davenport have done an incredible job of picturing what work will be done by machines and what work will be done by people. But how this actually comes together in an organization is something that we feel like the community we're setting up really needs to look at that and share, promote sharing among organizations about that topic. Let's look a little bit more specifically at these conclusions before we move to Stu and a case that where we've sort of tried to parse out these things. The accelerating force disrupting organizations, societies, et cetera, includes a lot of things. First of all, I think it's fairly clear that if work can be codified, it will be digitized, and that's just a train that's going down the track. It's going down the track for economic reasons. It's going down the track for customer service reasons. It's going down the track because there is a lot of work that can be codified that human beings really don't have the capability to do, because our brains don't process large amounts of data nearly as fast as it's processed by by machines. And how do we deal with that when, if you take it to its extreme, machines may actually run the world and organizations may actually be run by machines? A lot of people are saying you can actually imagine that will indeed happen, and there'll just be a few people who worry about what's programmed into the machines and a few people who are able to troubleshoot those machines, and almost everything else will be done digitally. All the interfaces with customers and the new product development, and et cetera. The perspective that a lot of people who are thinking about this and working with this transition have, and this picks up again on Davenport's work, is that technology will replace some workers, but it will augment everybody who remains. So the notion that people are going to be augmented by machines, even if not replaced by machines, is really critical, because what that basically means for companies is everybody in the organization is going to be impacted by this eventually, and it's those who can really work with and understand automation and digitization and artificial intelligence and all the different neural networks and all the different elements of this that are going to be the skills and the people that will find a home in organizations. And I think this has a really serious implication for org design, because if you if it can be codified, it'll be digitized to its ultimate extreme. It really means that managers are greatly at risk, at least as we know them today, because technology will play a key role in coordinating and integrating and decision-making based on large amounts of data and based on strategic objectives. And this will fundamentally change the role and configuration of managers. We'll talk about that as conclusion number 3. I think number 4 is really important, because in this world, the powerful digital platforms, such as those created by Uber or Amazon or Google, et cetera, and people are saying really there's 5 or 6 companies that control these, and they're going to control and shape, how life is led. If we have to decide, is that the right thing to do or not? But they're shaping and constraining not only their business and their customers, but the entire ecosystems of how life is led and work is done. And if companies that are putting in a digital platform, let's say in order to move McDonald's from fast food where there's people behind the counter to a complete self-service environment where even the food could be digitally prepared, have to really consider what are the boundaries of our organization, and what are all the ancillary and component elements of these platforms, and what's our interface with customers, but what's our interface with all kinds of other stakeholders, including, of course, the whole supply chain, but also the people in the communities, the people in the workforce, et cetera. So organization design starts to become ecosystem design, and the case that Stu's going to share really addresses that fact. Of course, we're going to have distributed everything. Get your skills, get your knowledge wherever it is. Open innovation has already been well tested, but will become probably a much more accepted way in which the changes are made in our society. And then I think it's really safe to say that even power is going to be distributed, and we can no longer look at the top of the hierarchy and do what all of us have trained our necks to point upwards and look at what's the CEO saying. And if things are moving as fast as people say it will, and are just as distributed as people say it will be, then we will be, I just did something wrong here. Then we will be looking all around at our ecosystem and throughout the organization and through all our lateral connections. So is this all bad for people? Well, the interesting thing that commentators on this are saying is that we're already training our stakeholders, the workforce, the customers, other stakeholders, to have fundamentally different expectations for work. And the new people who are coming in, one of our members of our group was Bob Johansson from the Futures Institute. These people are saying they want a very radically different organization. They don't like the bureaucracy. They don't like the levels. And they really would like to come into a situation where they can use their skills and knowledge and work in more empowered teams. And our customers don't want to have to go through bureaucratic processes. They really would like to be able to do 2 clicks. The MIT thing that I listened to just now said, if it's more than 3 clicks, people won't even stay with whatever your self-service is, right? So they want to be able to have that. And so whether we, who are perhaps baby boomers, I'll admit to that, think that's the best world for people or not, the expectations are changing dramatically. And so if we look 10 years ahead, we've got to design our organizations now to meet those expectations. Let me stop for just a minute and see if Stuart or Chris have anything they want to add to that conclusion.
The only thing I would add to is I hook back to what you said earlier, and that is, as we were sort of coming to grips with this trend and this conclusion, the value implications of the whole thing, right? Yeah. This trend is coming. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But I think we ended up with a lot of discussion and debate around was, are people prepared, are organizations prepared for it? Are they clear about their own strategies? Are they clear about their values? If they aren't, they're just going to accept, the public media and the public pressure will be just adopt everything. And there will be no discussion about the implication of this on the way your organization is set up, about the impact it's going to have on people. And so we really started getting into, a lot of discussions about the value implications of this trend, if people aren't aware of what's going on.
Yeah, this is Stu. Yeah, my reaction is that there seems to be, like with any of these changes, and this is much more of a discontinuous change, a movement towards, okay, we're leaving hierarchies and then we're moving towards full integrated networks. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's really a mix of both. And right now, everyone seems to be kind of jumping on the bandwagon that everything has to be digital and everything is going to be discontinuous. So I think that the magnitude of the change that Sue's talking about is true, but there's going to be a more measured way to get there.
Yeah, I think the how you get there is really the other piece of what we're trying to set up our community to examine.
Yeah.
Okay, conclusion 2, those organizations that are going to thrive are going to be guided by a strong and discontinuous vision of the future. We're seeing cases of it, I think, around the world. I mentioned McDonald's, and although GE is having a hiccup, they were planning for a totally digitalized world and working through digital platforms, and many other companies as well, Siemens. I mean, we could just name them on and on and on. And a lot of this is because of disruption, where industries that thought they had a nice contained change plan to start incorporating digitization are suddenly finding that if they don't deal with the entire transition pretty quickly, Amazon is going to eat their lunch. It's moved into the food retail business. It's moving into the home improvements business. There's probably 8 or 10 businesses that it's taken this whole notion of a platform, and it can implement it remarkably quickly. That means that we really don't have too much time for this measured response. We have to figure out what capabilities we really need quickly and how to put those in place. And I think that's a very large ask of companies, and probably it's a survival issue for many companies. So looking at the full ecosystem to respond to Amazon, retailers of food are having to figure out what is their entire ecosystem and how do they do a better job of it. New business models, what's our revenue model, and how do we align the organization with that, but also the customer interface. New operating models to really take advantage of digitization, both for cost savings and for product development and other key value-enhancing decisions. New employment models, how do we get the flexibility we need? Because many companies clearly are simply not populated by people in their key management positions, let alone throughout the organization, who can work in an augmented manner as a partner of machines. And then the Agile, Bob Johansson from the Futures Institute used the term, and in his new book has the term shape-shifting, that we can't, when we design an organization, we can't assume that it's going to keep the same shape for more than probably 6 months to a year, that there's going to be new opportunities and new business focuses and new customer sets and new threats that you have to respond to very quickly, and the ability really to be built to change, which Chris has worked with for years on his study of agility, be able to move resources where they're needed, be able to change the hierarchy, change the power structure to be able to respond, is going to have to be put in place to deal with that dynamism. And then organizing around customer journeys and networks of activities, no silos, and teams of teams that most of the organizations that were represented said, we're definitely working through teams of teams, and they cut across our hierarchies, and we haven't changed our management configuration, but we better do that if we're going to be able to work this way. I think the fundamental issue, and it's a value issue for people, is that upskilling and digital dexterity is replacing the tenure and experience as a determinant of opportunity. People who've been around for 40 years and really know how to develop good advertisements but don't work in a digital space with interactive advertising probably going to have a very hard time leading and running and being a manager of groups that are trying to do that. And so we see the young kids coming in with skills and with dexterity that has huge contribution to the organization and where it needs to go, but we don't really yet structured to address that. So that's sort of the pulling from the future and really designing for discontinuity. Chris, Stu, anything you'd like to add to that one?
Well, I think for me the pieces, and obviously I've got a lot of stake in the whole agility built to change side of things. But I think that research starts to show its limitations. It gives you a lot of principles, and so it gives us a little bit of a guidance about, some of the ways that we have to think about it. But every organization now is going to have to answer what does that mean for themselves. So I think we have some principles. Thank goodness we have some principles in the way we're going to think about design and perceiving and testing and learning. But now each of those principles is going to have to get concretized and really pulled to the ground to demonstrate what it really looks like for this specific impact and this specific environmental trend that we're talking about in terms of digitalization.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. Conclusion 3 is around leadership, and one of the partners you probably noticed in this work that we're working very closely with is Bill Passmore from the Center for Creative Leadership, and their interest comes from the fact that almost every company they're dealing with is saying, we don't have a clue what we need to do for leadership for the future. We know it's different. We're trying to take old models and old approaches and use them for this new set of problems, and it just simply isn't working. So I think that very quickly on the leadership one, what I'd like to stress is that it's a systems thinking issue. It's a socio-technical phenomenon. I think the leader of the future is going to be partnered with machines. At their hip is going to be all of the information and the ability to model and to simulate and to work with whatever they're leading in the organization to move resources flexibly and to inspire and guide whatever the roles and the people are that are being pulled together, whether they come from internal or external, and that without foresight and looking ahead, leaders aren't going to be able to plan the action and the responses and the new models and implement them effectively. So this is a much upgraded set of management knowledge and skills and capabilities that really relies on planning from the future and being able to really see how the social and the technical fit together. The second set of issues, which is 4 and 5, is that leadership roles are going to come and go, and they're going to be, hierarchies will be thin, but leadership will be all around. And so leadership is a function and a role. It's not a permanent position, and it really has to do with finding the right people to lead the right initiative at the right time. And what this means is that instead of the hierarchy, we'll still have the hierarchy, but we'll have a lot of distributed power. And the role of the hierarchy will make sure the right activities are happening in the right place, not to command and control those activities, which means that the self-management word is coming back. The word that we used in the 1970s with socio-technical systems is that if we don't have people, leaders, who can create teams that can manage themselves, it's going to be hard to move as fast as the environment is moving. This doesn't, however, preclude the need for what's on number 6, which is the clear strategies and direction setting. Those processes have to become very, very strong in the organization because self-management depends on clarity. If you don't know what you're supposed to be contributing to, it's hard to manage yourself. And so there'll be continual adjustment, but there will be clarity around why are we making these adjustments, where are we going, what is our strategy, what's our business model. Things like risk-taking are going to have to be competencies that will be spread throughout the organization. I think this is a daunting set of requirements, but I think this is truly what's needed when machines and people start to have to work together very closely in order to be sustainable as a business. Stu or Chris, anything you want to add to that?
I'm good, thanks.
No, I'm good. I think this stuff Stu has been doing in terms of trying to get people in large groups to think about foresight and insight. I think that's that becomes the conversation that we have to start having and making meaning.
Yeah, for the whole organization, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn this over to Stu. I'd like to introduce Stu again. Some of you who have been to our programs and have done other things know Stu. I think his consulting firm, Spring Networks, is doing extremely interesting work to try to create the possibility for agility, for incorporation of digitalization, and for changing the way in which services and products are delivered and designed. And he's going to share a little bit about where he sees design going based on his experience and based on our workshop as well, and also where the processes for design that need to be put in place. And then he's going to talk about just a sample case, and I had the pleasure of working with him to really think reflectively on this case and write it up into a working paper that's available on our website. And I think it demonstrates almost all of the issues that we've just talked about. So, Stu, I'm turning that over to you. I think I'm turning that over to you.
Great. Somebody just needs to change the slide here.
Yeah,
and be all
I got to
set.
find your name. This is the thing we were talking about. There is Stu Winby. Okay. And could you just start talking while I fumble around?
You can just
Sure.
press it, Sue.
Wait a second. I'm having trouble. Yeah, there he is. Okay.
I wonder why this went dark. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay. You have it? Are you the presenter?
I'm the presenter. I don't have on the screen. It doesn't have my slide, but that's okay. I have it in front of me. I can talk to it.
Oh, okay.
But that's okay. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to talk about a couple questions and then present a case. The questions we came up with is, what does this mean for design and for the design process as well as design in the future? And this first slide.
There's a problem. I'm sorry, Stu. I did turn it over to you, and you don't have that arrow in front of you, or do you?
I got it. I have it now.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
I have it.
Okay.
Oh, there we are. Okay. So what does this mean for designs in the future? And I think, one issue that Chris talked about is that not only is digital technology having an impact on businesses and companies, but it's also having an impact on the whole area of organization design. This new technology has the ability to decentralize information processing. In other words, how we make decisions and how we problem solve. And so that means that there's more information at the operating level, and if we link the customer to the operating level, what all that does is it has a couple impacts. One is it changes the nature of decision making at the top, which in part moves to more foresight, insight kind of stuff that we were talking about. But also it starts eliminating middle management because of the digital capability of the analytical capability. And the third thing is that the operating level now, if you're pushing digital information processing lower at the operating level, then there's going to be more continuous customer change, customer improvement. And every time there's continuous customer improvement, that changes the value proposition. And when the value proposition starts changing, that means that work is going to change, and it also means that it implicates the business model. So you have a reciprocal process going on where you have shifting business models and shifting operating work systems, and that's fairly significant to what we thought about in terms of organization design. What we did in the lab session here in the Valley is that we organized it into 3 different pieces, designing the strategic architecture, which all of you know is generally the executive team and the layer below that, and the formal architecture of the organization. And then the second part of the organization design structure is designing the operating model, the part of the organization that creates value for the customer. I think one of the big principles or concepts to really understand here is, and we've been talking about this for a while, but this is evolving quickly, is that new organizations to survive are going to have to be ambidextrous. In other words, they're going to have part of the organization that's specifically designed for optimization and for predictability and for efficiency. And there's going to have to be another part of the organization that's specifically designed and designed very differently for from innovation, for agility, for networks. And both of these systems are going to have to be sort of collateral design systems that work with one another. And the ambidextrous model, you have to have an ambidextrous model so that you're focused on producing revenue and having constant relationships with your market, but at the same time, what you need to do is have ongoing innovations. You have to have an offensive and defensive position around the market and be able to get new products to market, new services, and respond very quickly. One point that I want to mention is that this new ambidextrous model has been emerging, and it seems to indicate that there's 4 distinct capabilities that are needed when you as a designer organize the ambidextrous structure. One capability is on the optimization side, which is all the P&Ls and and it's a network, it's a performance network. And the job of that network is to focus on revenue performance. The second capability that's emerging in this ambidextrous model are all the shared services. It's all the functions, and those functions really need to seemingly do 2 things. One is work together in an integrated way to add productivity benefits to your P&Ls, but also be the homerooms for all the networks. So in other words, it's a model where you'll have functions that will go out to projects on the network side of the equation, and those homerooms will be they'll probably functionally organized. On the other side of the ambidextrous model is you'll have 2 other capabilities. One will be the building of an incubator. And these incubators, what I've been seeing at executive levels is that there's typically some form of innovation going on, but not near what is needed to be able to have a good offensive and defensive competitive position in the environment. So the incubator basically has a portfolio of innovations. It has a separate and its own distinct operating model. Generally, there's a venture board that manages the incubator, and the incubator has type 1, type 2, type 3 innovations. Type 1 innovations go into the productivity network, the shared services network, to implement, to be able to get the benefits. But the type 2, type 3 innovations are innovations that are experimenting and gaining capability, particularly in digital applications. The other capability is a transformational capability that takes digital capabilities and moves it to market, and that's very important because those are going to be the things that cause disruption. The big issue about these 4 capabilities is that if you get disrupted at an infrastructure level, you can probably recover very quickly. If you get disrupted at the second level, which is the business operating model level, then you probably got things in the incubator that are going to help you cope and deal with that. But if you get disrupted at the business model level, then your transformational network should have things going on that will either combat that or help you cope with that, or be a disruptee yourself. The hierarchies, what we're seeing is that as you move more towards the hierarchy to networks, the foreground, background, the hierarchy starts fading into the background and the networks go into the foreground. Another part of this model is that if you look at executive teams, and we've seen this with a couple of companies here in the Valley, is that if you organize the decision-making of the executive team, they seem to fall into these small 2 to 3 person nodes, and those nodes can be attached to networks, the 4 networks that we just talked about. And so when you have an issue, let's say generally the executive team will work from a kind of a recognition, strategic choice, alignment mode, where they will do a lot of foresight insight work, and they'll put together a rapid design group that will stress test that decision, and then they'll make a strategic option. So what you're doing is the interface between the networks and the executive team are really occurring in that decision node model, and that seems to be something that's emerging, and that's that we're seeing with some companies. The platforms, you're hearing a lot about platforms, and some people are basically saying organizations are going to be total platform models, and I think in some cases that may be the case, but in most cases that's not the case. I mean, you have platforms where the customer is on a platform through an app or some kind of digital device that connects all the different users, but there'll be other parts of the organization that aren't associated with the platform. I think one issue about platforms that's real important is that there's the emergence of workforce platforms, where you have a talent-based market platform, and some of the stuff that's coming out of McKinsey, where you're able to reallocate resources very, very quickly that support this network structure. So some of these platforms are internal, and some of them are part of the operating system. In designing the operating system, the focus is typically on the customer and linking the customer with some type of technology, either a device or a website or something along those lines. And what that does is that forces organizations to be much more focused on organizing around customers. So I think one of the things we're going to see, and we're seeing this in healthcare, is that rather than organizing around geographies or products, we're seeing folks organizing around customer segments. The emergence of a new type of operating team model, the SMART team, which we call a social technical design, is starting to occur. That is, so customers have data, the data goes up to the cloud analyzes the data comes back, to now an intact team that's organized around some kind of customer segment, customer grouping. That team takes that data, and then the data is used for preventative or forecasting or improving the experience of the customer. So the SMART team now is getting lots of analytical data and being able to make decisions real time based on the analytical data that it's getting. Generally, these SMART teams are multifunctional. And the other aspect about the SMART team is that their focus a lot is not only prevention, but it's also on continuous experience improvement. So when you have that structure in a company and they're continually improving experience, and you have competitors that aren't doing that, you can see how the power and pulling away market share occurs very quickly. And of course, these teams are organized around being much more self-managing. And I think the issue around teaming is that we think about teams as teams and self-management teams, but I think we're going to have to start thinking of these teams as work systems, because you're not just getting a group of people and we look at the behavioral components of teams. These teams are going to have all the structural properties of a work system. In other words, they're going to have there's a company here in the Valley that's actually creating some of these apps where there's you can look at your app and you can see where the team is doing in terms of its measures, where it's progressing in terms of its goals and objectives. The whole performance management system will be part of a digital work system that's associated with the team. So they're really work systems. Okay, want to move the slide here to the next
Alice.
Next one. There we go. One of the things that we learned in the session that we had, the lab session, is how critically important purpose, values, and strategies are to the design process. And we think that's really going to be critical for lots of reasons. One is that you have multifunctional designers and ecosystem designers in these systems. And they're going to need to coalesce and work around a common set of values and a common strategy. So it's not just a design team like we've had in the past that gets together and does this work. It's really a multifunctional ecosystem that's coming together. The glue is going to be purpose, values, and strategy. And that really became loud and clear in the lab session we had. The design process, we talk about social technical systems, and we still feel that even more so than when the term was originated, the relationship between humans and people and machines and technology is going to be increasingly more important with a focus on joint optimization. Smart machines will be our coworkers. Smart machines will be there at our use to be able to problem solve, ideate, and come up with new solutions for customers and for competitiveness. That joint optimization, that way of working together, and you'll have people, it's almost like a machinist on a lathe. Over time, you get to know that technology, and you can work that technology in the service of solving problems. And that optimization is going to be very important. Stakeholder participation and eco-wide co-design, and we talked about that. Those are going to be the tools. So as Chris mentioned, any of these large group rapid prototyping activities will be design tools that can be used in the organization, not as an event, but as a intact work system. And I'm looking at our time, and I know we have much time, so why don't we go to the case here real quick on the next slide, Alice. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, Sue?
I thought we skipped a slide, sorry.
No, I think we're okay. I think we're in. So anyway, on the satellite case, this is a dialysis company that the task was to move people from the clinic structure to a home dialysis model. The clinical outcomes, the lower cost, higher clinical outcomes, better patient experience in home dialysis, but for all sorts of reasons, people, the majority of the organization, over 80%, was in the clinic dialysis. So the issue was, can we redesign the organization using a digital strategy to move in that direction, was really the task, and this was really driven by the board and the CEO. The process we had 4 phases. We had a research phase, a design phase, a prototype test phase, and a scale phase. In the research phase, what we did over 100 ethnographic data gathering interviews. And by the way, as Sue mentioned, what I'm talking about is probably the new approach to organization design in this digital environment. So we did a lot of ethnographic work. We did a touch point analysis, assessment in mapping the entire patient journey. When we mapped the patient journey, we looked at all the people that they were touching and the channels that they were touching people with in terms of emails or voicemails. That enables us to create an ecosystem map. And we also did a variance analysis where there was errors in any type of the experience of what they expected or wanted. And then we did an ideation map in terms of where they would feel would be an idealized situation. Once we did all the research, we put everybody into a design lab. We had the lab environment was co-designed by all members of the ecosystem. Everybody was in the same room at the same time. We had a team that was working on technology. And essentially what the customers drove, along with physicians and family members and vendors and so forth, was how do we eliminate all these variances? How do we redesign the work towards an idealized state? And then as we did that, all the roles and the responsibilities of members of the ecosystem, as well as the typical system, started shifting and changing, as well as all those people develop relationships among each other. All of that, and at the same time, the coding folks that were doing the software were in there, taking all this data and starting to put together their technology platform. So you can see how the social system and the technical system were really working together to be able to make this work. We came up with a prototype. The prototype was tested. The prototype was an app that changed the role, particularly in the front end of physicians and nurses, created new roles like Pathfinder positions. All the users got new devices. At the same time, as we're doing this, and this is not talked about a lot, but you have to go in and now go to the parent structure and change the parent structure. If you go to the next slide, Alice, you'll see that the reimagined home at the top is what I have been just talking about. And then at the bottom, you have the center transformation. So when we got to the prototype and test, we started going inside the company, had 5 pilots going inside the company to redesign those work systems, those organizations. There were 5 centers. And the design of that was essentially moving that towards a social technical design, or what you would call a work system team-based design, because they would now be prepared to accept this new technology and this new prototype. And then once those prototypes and it's still in progress, once those prototypes get tested and they're working and the new organization does what it's supposed to do, then what we do is we scale across the 70 centers. Sue, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think we could probably incorporate a few of the questions into this that have appeared in the chat box. One of which is this inevitable transition? And I think we could, from this particular case, we could say what most organizations are dealing with, which is satellite is in a very rapidly changing healthcare arena that is demanding that things be less expensive, but even more than that, can we go back to the picture? That even more than that, that is demanding a greater value outcome. And they did a lot of looking at their objectives in terms of both the outcomes for the patient, the outcomes for the payer, the outcomes for the people working in the process. And if they don't move to this sort of a way of doing dialysis, they will find themselves vis-a-vis the rest of the ecosystem for healthcare out of touch with the connectivity that is starting to develop between all the different stakeholders, but also between all the different deliverers of care and across different functionalities and different disciplines of healthcare. So would they have chosen to do digital home dialysis because they think it's, values-wise better? They might have, but the other thing is that if they don't figure out a way to do this, they really have a questionable sustainability through time. I think a lot of organizations are in that boat. So I don't think it's that we're necessarily advocating this. I think we're saying it's the reality. It's happening. How can we sustain a focus on ecosystem values and stakeholder values at the same time that we make this transition is the essence of the satellite process, and it is also, I think, the essence of what the design challenge is that we all face.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I think from a practical matter, when you're doing this kind of work, as soon as you focus on the customer and you really take a look at the customer journey, what that does, and you have ecosystems involved in that, what that does is it opens up a whole can of worms in a very positive way. You could really, the ecosystem becomes the new unit of analysis. It becomes a new work system. And you can start changing things fairly radically within the organization, how you deliver value, in a way that is going to be significant for the customer. And that customer is going to experience that. And in a very short period of time, if you're in that position, you're going to be able to have happier customers, and there'll be a migration of customers to your service or product. So, but when you get into the customer redesign, the amount of change that's required is fairly significant, and that's what changes the organization design.
It's also what aligns people with each other, even the doctors, the pharmacy providers, et cetera. They all will align around something that delivers better care.
Yeah.
Chris?
Well, I was looking to see if I could find some other questions. I think we've answered some of them. Some of them were around, do you in these accelerated labs that you do, Stu, that you bring customers in, and that's absolutely true. You try to get as many customers, as many stakeholders as possible in the same room together to design that ecosystem together. I think it also addressed the question about multiple goals. So Satellite had to be thinking about not only the financial return of this shift, but also the values associated with. Right. Is it better for clinical outcomes for people to treat themselves and to take the dialysis treatment in their home as opposed to coming to a clinic 3 times a week or whatever it is? The old model of the customer journey being built around what I want to do versus how they want to sort of have the treatment handled. So I think the systems that you're designing here are representing that goal and value evolution, and it's being enabled by technology, which becomes kind of a really interesting piece to the whole thing.
Yeah, and the point we made of managing from the future, I think Satellite clearly was wanting the cost savings of having home dialysis. That's for sure, because there's no question about that. And organizations won't survive into the future if they don't deal with the cost and the value and what payers are willing to pay. That's for sure. But also, I think what's happening in many places like Satellite and other healthcare deliverers is that they're saying, in the short term, this isn't going to save us any money. We just have to have a different image of what healthcare is going to look like in 10 years, because it's clear that the whole system will implode if we deliver healthcare the way we have historically. And so we have to start developing these capabilities, figuring out how people fit with it, and how we can do both the social and the technical in order to be ready for a shift that will occur where we will be disrupted if we don't have these capabilities. Other organizations are already being disrupted and have to do it really fast. But what almost every commentator in every case that we've read and been part of says is if you don't have a vision of where you need to be in the future, you'll end up with short-term cost-cutting and a lot of initiatives that don't play together. And it's getting them together around a vision that's going to enable an organization to be the survivor. There's a comment about soft skills, and they're extraordinarily important. And if you read the Davenport work around what really work does get replaced, it's the soft skills. It's the part of understanding, what motivates people. It's the how you pull teams together, how you really can get a team to feel like they're part of a system. It's those soft skills that actually can't be done by a machine. And they're going to be really critical to the role of the manager, who is, it looks like, going to be managing systems where people and machines work hand in glove.
Yeah. Yeah, the one point I just wanted to make, the reason I spent some time on those capabilities is because the big issue is how either you're offensive or defensive, and if you're in a defensive position, how are you going to learn at such a fast rate to be able to stay alive if you have everybody moving quickly into these digital capabilities? The technology is not as difficult to get as the social system change that's going to be required with ecosystem members and the relationships and everything else. So you got to have you have to have some kind of structure that could respond quickly, learn fast, and be structured to be both have an offensive position and a defensive position, so they can do well.
Yeah, and I think there was a comment in the chat box that more and more it's going to be a question of the soft pieces and of what's the direction and what are the activities, and let people go and do it, and structure is going to be much less important. And what we would agree with is structure as we have thought about it, the bureaucratic form, is probably not going to work in the digital future. But that there still needs to be some core things like what Stu was talking about, which is how do you make sure they're the right portfolio of activities across improving the system, advancing it, delivering on it. How do you make sure that you've got the right teams dealing with different parts of your market environment and different parts of the innovation tapestry that lies ahead of you? That has to be managed somehow. And the best that we could figure out in our workshop was it's going to be a team of teams. An organization is going to be a team of teams, and it's going to be very, very dynamic, but it will still have the issue of how do you figure out what the portfolio is and how do you deploy resources into the right initiatives and the right activities at the right time. And that looks a lot like how do you actually have hubs in a system that are playing that top-level strategic role.
Governance kind of thing.
Governance, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This platform we talked about, workforce platform, it allows for reconfigurability. So you're moving assets, people, into different configurations very, very quickly to be able to produce X, and the organization has to have the ability to do that. And that's kind of a whole new skill. It involves soft skills and technology, as well as the architecture of the organization. So.
Okay, so we have reached the end of our time, and we've gone over, and we apologize, and thank you for sticking with us. Alice, if you could just put up the last slide. The two things we'd like to say is that this is a work in progress, and if you are in the middle of this and are interested in joining our community, please reach out to us. Second thing is we have redesigned we are in the process of redesigning our design programs to incorporate this view of the future of organizations. You are certainly most welcome to come or send colleagues. But I think the major thing that we've done is we are really working on the change processes of adapting to this kind of disruption. And here, like designs, we think that the current change management models are really badly lagging what's happening in the business environment. And we're trying to take some steps about what do they really look like in today's disruptive world. And please be aware of these. We will continue to have webinars with our major models and frameworks that we're developing. And if you have friends and colleagues who would like to come to these, please make them aware of it.
Send them along.
Send them along, yep.
Great, great. It was great to see so many good friends and names here. I'm going through the list, and it's just, it's always good to touch base with the community again and see what everybody's up to. And hopefully we've been able to shed some light on some ideas and give you some new ways of thinking about things.
And thanks to Stu for joining us. Stu, I know you're in a personally difficult time right now, and it's great working with you and building this new community with you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invite.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.